Chapter 2287, Make a Bet. Chapter 2287, Make a Bet. Oh, Ling Han asked in a casual tone. Celestial Maiden Yunhe almost exploded with rage. Did this person not understand the concept of monarch star? She humphed, and continued, Yu Yuan is already at the third leaf of the eighth lotus. No matter how freakish you are, you still can't block even a single finger of his. He's the ace and the number one elite of the 100 Battles Academy. In the next battle of 1000 realms, our placing will be determined by how well he can perform. Ling Han's interest was piqued upon hearing this, and he asked, what battle of 1000 territories? Celestial Maiden Yunhe truly wanted to slap him across the face. He didn't even know about the battle of 1000 territories. How in the world was he a student of the 100 Battles Academy? However, upon remembering that Ling Han was always cultivating in seclusion, she realized that he was perhaps truly ignorant of these matters. Our dimension has a total of 999 territories, each of which has an academy similar to ours. In order to motivate everyone to cultivate, a competition between the academies is held every 1 million years, she explained. Oh, then how high can our academy place? Ling Han asked. 72nd, Celestial Maiden Yunhe replied with pride. Is 72nd very high? Ling Han didn't speak. However, his expression was already speaking louder than words. Don't think that 72nd isn't high. You have to realize that there are almost 1000 academies. Celestial Maiden Yunhe immediately said. She wore an expression of reverence, and she continued, if it weren't for Brother Yu Yuan's immense power, we couldn't have even made the top 500. Ling Han understood that this was the power of a monarch star. One monarch star could rival at least 10 monarch tiers. Scouring throughout the entire celestial realm, they could only scrape together 10 or so monarch stars. In the foreign realm, however, even if Yu Yuan were only on the bottom of the pile of monarch stars, it would still signify a total of at least 72 monarch stars. The gulf between the two realms was like the distance between heaven and earth. Whom has Yu Yuan taken a fancy to? Ling Han asked. This person actually dared to covet his women. Xing, Celestial Maiden Yunhe replied. Oh, such good taste, huh? Even though the three women had all donned disguises, the Empress' powerful aura was simply impossible to alter. She was still noble and aloof. To supreme prodigies like Ling Han and Yu Yuan, she was as attractive as could be. Ling Han nodded, and said, I'll remember this. Next time I encounter him, I'll definitely pummel him until he abandons his preposterous thoughts. Celestial Maiden Yunhe was rendered speechless. She had told Ling Han about this in the hopes that he would understand that Hu Niu and the others were off limits. To her disbelief, however, Ling Han reacted in a manner completely opposite to her expectations. He was now in competition with Yu Yuan. What about the other two? Ling Han asked. Celestial Maiden Yunhe was flabbergasted. Just how great is your appetite? You've yet to win over even one of them, yet you're already thinking about the others? Wu Ya and Zun Feng, Celestial Maiden Yunhe replied. Wu Ya is a monarch tier at the 7th leaf of the 11th lotus. Even though he won't necessarily reach the pinnacle 11th leaf, he's already an incredible talent. She paused for a moment before continuing, Zun Feng is a monarch tier at the 8th leaf of the 8th lotus, and is even more powerful. In fact, these three are the three most powerful cultivators in the angel quarters. Brother Yu Yuan is more so the most powerful cultivator in our entire academy. She wore an expression of reverence. That was a monarch star. Such prodigies were extremely rare, and there were only around 100 or so monarch stars even throughout the entire foreign realm. Now, do you still think you have a chance with those three women? Celestial Maiden Yunhe asked. Ling Han didn't reply, and he simply looked at Celestial Maiden Yunhe with a strange gaze. He chuckled, and said, time and time again, you're persuading me not to chase after the three of them. Are you perhaps interested in me? Celestial Maiden Yunhe was astounded. Why didn't this demon look in the mirror? With such a terrifying appearance, how could she take a fancy to him? Was she blind? PSS off, she spat. Her eyes were about to shoot flames. She had never come across anyone as narcissistic as Ling Han before. Ling Han roared with laughter, and he said, "Would you believe me if I said that I could win over all three of them?" You! Celestial Maiden Yunhe didn't know whether to laugh or to feel angry. Which woman from the angel race would become attracted to a demon? Do you want to make a bet? Ling Han said, purposefully toying with her. Sure. Celestial Maiden Yunhe immediately replied. If you lose, you owe me 1 fruit from the 100 fruits tree. No, since there are 3 of them, you owe me 3 fruits if you fail to attract any of them. She was at the 5th severance, yet her brother still hadn't reached this level yet. Even though they had a celestial fruit, it was only a single one. The more they had, the more insurance there would be. Moreover, even if her brother succeeded with a single fruit, they could still sell the others for an astronomical price. It would be silly of her not to raise the stakes. This was akin to someone gifting her money, so why wouldn't she take the offer? Ling Han smiled, and said, fine. If I fail to win over any of them, I owe you 3 celestial fruits. But what if I succeed? You tell me, Celestial Maiden Yunhe said. She wouldn't mind even if Ling Han named an exorbitant price. After all, she was confident that Ling Han definitely wouldn't succeed. In any case, how could they be attracted to a member of the demon race? Especially when there were better choices in her own tribe. Ling Han pondered for a moment before saying, I want 7th lotus great herbs. For each one I win over, you owe me 1 great herb. Deal, Celestial Maiden Yunhe immediately said. Both of them were betting celestial medicines, so this was a fair exchange. Moreover, it was impossible for Ling Han to win. Deal, Ling Han said with a smile. They traveled for 3 days before finally stopping to rest. Sure enough, the others isolated Ling Han. They sat in a circle around the campfire, yet when they saw Ling Han walking over, not a single one of them shuffled aside to let him sit. Instead, they continued to eat and drink as if he didn't exist. Heh, so what if you're powerful? Can you attack us now? Even Celestial Maiden Yunhe remained unmoving with a smile on her face. She showed no signs of wanting to help Ling Han. After all, who told him to be so arrogant? Ling Han smiled faintly before walking up to the Empress, and asking, Can I sit here? Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. Just how shameless can you be? Those are 3 stunning beauties, so even looking at them is soiling them, yet you actually dare to request a seat between them. Why don't you go die? However, in a sight that shocked them even further, the 2 women actually shuffled aside to create a spot for Ling Han. Fuck. They were all dazed as they stared at Ling Han taking a seat. They felt like they were in a dream. Celestial Maiden Yunhe had been drinking tea, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of the beverage. She then broke into a fit of coughing. Ling Han had claimed that he could win over all 3 women. Even though this couldn't be counted as a success, he was still at least already halfway to success. Otherwise, who would let a stinking man sit between them, much less a stinky insect from the demon race? Everyone was overcome with agonizing grief. Just how breathtakingly beautiful were Ru and Xing. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, they submitted to the lustful request of this demon. They truly wanted to smack themselves to death with a piece of tofu. Fortunately, Nyo was pouting in clear displeasure. It was very likely that she had developed a strong resentment toward Ba. Nyo is unhappy now. Hu Nyo said in bitterness. Sit next to Nyo. Sit next to Nyo, she shouted as she patted the space next to her. Holy fuck. Everyone choked and spluttered upon hearing this. Just then, they had still thought that Hu Nyo would definitely develop resentment toward Ling Han. As it turned out, however, she was actually jealous that Ling Han hadn't chosen to sit beside her. Ling Han laughed, and said, Come, sit on my lap. Hu Nyo's displeasure instantly transformed into delight. She then stood up before jumping into Ling Han's embrace, finding a comfortable position to sit in. She wore an expression of happiness and comfort. Everyone else. Chapter 2288, Swindling Others. Chapter 2288, Swindling Others. Who would have imagined that 3 breathtaking monarch-tier beauties would actually be won over by an ugly and pig-like demon? This was simply illogical. Ling Han toured around to raise his eyebrows at Celestial Maiden Yunhe as if he were telling her to uphold her side of the wager. She now owed him 3 celestial medicines. The others didn't know about their bet, so they instantly became so infuriated that they wanted to bash him to death. He had already won over 3 supreme beauties, yet he still wanted to flirt with Celestial Maiden Yunhe. Meanwhile, as a woman, Celestial Maiden Yunhe refused to believe that female monarch tears would fall in love at first sight. This was especially so since the protagonist was of the demon race. Not only that, but all 3 of them had fallen for him in unison. She came to a realization, and she asked, "You were already acquainted, am I right?" Ling Han roared with laughter. He clapped his hands, and said, "Yes, indeed. How smart of you." Even though she was being praised by Ling Han, Celestial Maiden Yunhe didn't feel a shred of happiness at all. This was because she had still lost 3 celestial medicines to Ling Han. No, she had been swindled out of 3 celestial medicines. Ling Han had purposefully led her into a trap. She was extremely angry, yet she couldn't help but admire Ling Han's ability. As a demon, he had actually won the hearts of 3 stunningly beautiful angels. He was truly a god of relationships. Everyone was still eating, yet it was as if the food was all tasteless. The 4 stunning beauties had all been won over by Ling Han, and just thinking about this pained their souls. However, prodigies were prodigies, after all. After finishing their meal, they composed themselves and set off again. Nothing was as important as nurturing their own strength. Moreover, Hunyo and the others had already caught the eyes of Yu Yuan and the others. As such, when they returned to the academy, Yu Yuan and the others definitely wouldn't stand idly by as Ling Han embraced the women left and right. They continued to advance. At times, they would enter regions that were fluctuating with the regulation of light, and they would enter regions that were fluctuating with the regulation of darkness at other times. During the latter times, they would try to avoid the areas of concentrated regulations as much as possible, seeking areas that were more neutral. Fortunately, Ling Han's cultivation of the regulation of darkness wasn't powerful to begin with, so if he actively dispersed it, he wouldn't be affected by either the regulations of light or the regulation of darkness. Hunyo and the others had even lower mastery of the regulations, so they were naturally affected even less. Even though the 2 can't be cultivated in unison, one can take the time to analyze both and use them as a reference, Ling Han thought to himself. Heaven and earth were paramount, and their power was profound. Meanwhile, regulations were the materialization of heaven and earth's power. It was tangible, and it was comprehensible. It was no longer mysterious and elusive. By comprehending both the regulation of light and the regulation of darkness, perhaps he could discover the secret to the foreign realm's power. Add to this the fact that he had once been the ruler of a realm, and this would benefit him even more. He could transcend the regulations, and directly reach the fundamentals. Why was the core of heaven and earth so important? This was because it could allow one to witness matters transcendent above the regulations. Thereupon, one could obtain the knowledge to transcend the regulations. 3 months later, they arrived at the foot of a tall mountain. According to the information from my clan, this is most likely the tomb of an ancient elite, Celestial Maiden Yunhe said. She was finally willing to reveal some secrets. Before this, her lips had remained sealed. This is an examination given to me by my clan, and they want to see whether I can successfully unearth this ancient tomb or not. She looked at the others, and continued, "Please help me with your full strength. After opening the ancient tomb, everyone can take a treasure of their choice. If there are cultivation techniques, everyone can also make a copy for themselves. It's our honor to help you, Celestial Maiden." That's right. No need to mention treasures and what not, as long as there are cultivation techniques. Everyone was extremely polite. This was mainly because they already had no chance with Hunyo and the others. Meanwhile, Celestial Maiden Yunhe still hadn't fallen yet, so they naturally returned their gaze to her. "Then I'll take this opportunity to thank everyone first," Celestial Maiden Yunhe said as she curtsied to them. She then led them onto the mountain. She would frequently stop after walking for a while, and she would close her eyes to mull over something. Only after a moment would she start walking again. There was definitely an extremely complex map in her mind. Otherwise, there would have been no need to pause so often. Ling Han carefully observed his surroundings, and he discovered that there was indeed something peculiar about this place. The rocks were like pillars, with each of them upright and tall. He hadn't felt anything at first, but the further they ventured, the thicker the fog became. This seriously affected their vision. This was a formation. Roar. There was the howl of a beast, and a snow-white tiger suddenly lunged out from behind a stone pillar. It had a pair of wings, and it was clearly a holy beast. There was a snow-white lotus on its forehead, one with 7 petals and 2 leaves. Everyone's expression changed drastically. Even though there were many monarch tiers among them, those at the 5th severance could only rival those at the young soul. After all, there was still a major tier between them. Now, however, this holy beast was at the yin soul, meaning that it could rival 10. 5th severance monarch tiers. Moreover, this was under the condition that this holy beast wasn't a king tier or an emperor tier. Otherwise, it could easily obliterate them. Enter the formation. Celestial Maiden Yunhe cried. Before coming here, they had already made the necessary preparations. As such, they naturally wouldn't be sent into disarray by the appearance of a second leaf 7-petal holy beast. They immediately entered a formation, with 7 people in each subgroup. They could combine their power together, and they could unleash a battle prowess greater than if they simply fought together with no formation. Celestial Maiden Yunhe took the lead as she immediately charged at the tiger. However, Ling Han squinted his eyes as he observed this. The appearance of this tiger was far too strange. He had a nagging feeling that this wasn't a real tiger, but instead an illusion created by a formation. Boom! Celestial Maiden Yunhe's attack landed, and the tiger instantly shuddered before vanishing without a trace. Where has that holy beast gone? Perhaps it's mastered some spatial secret technique, allowing it to escape? That's right. How can a 2-leaves 7th lotus holy beast be killed so easily? They didn't dare to drop their guard, and they all remained extremely vigilant and careful lest the holy beast suddenly appeared and attacked them again. Ling Han smiled, and said, "No need to be so worried. This is most likely an illusion formation, so that holy beast can't possibly appear again." How conceited, the others said with a shake of their heads. Which part of that holy beast looked fake? Right at this moment, there was a flash of white as another holy beast appeared. It was a snow-white wolf that had a pair of wings on its back. Only its eyes were golden, and its appearance was extremely mighty and domineering. There were 7 petals and 3 leaves on its forehead. Not good, everyone exclaimed. Their expressions changed again. They could rival 2-leaf 7th lotus elites, yet those at the 3rd leaf were far too powerful. If they battled head-on, their only fate would be death. As such, only fools would charge into battle. Retreat first. Celestial Maiden Yunhe hurriedly shouted. Everyone retreated, and only Ling Han remained unmoving. The white wolf roared as it lunged at Ling Han. Ling Han stood with his hands clasped behind his back, completely ignoring the holy beast. Whoosh! The white wolf landed upon him, yet it directly passed through his body. It was as if Ling Han were transparent. "It's genuinely an illusion," everyone exclaimed in astonishment. They then looked at Ling Han in respect and admiration. They truly hadn't discovered anything wrong with the white wolf. The gulf between their observation skills was extremely clear. Ling Han simply wore a faint smile. It was more so a 6th sense that had told him that the holy beast was fake. Moreover, he hadn't possessed this kind of 6th sense before. It had only been nurtured after he had become the ruler of a realm. This was because the ruler of a realm could transcend the regulations and directly observe the fundamentals. However, he naturally wouldn't explain this. He looked at Celestial Maiden Yunhe, and said, "Come, continue to lead the way." Being able to see through these illusions was one matter, and wanting him to shatter this illusion formation was another matter altogether. Celestial Maiden Yunhe nodded in reply. At the same time, she breathed a sigh of relief in her mind. Fortunately, she had invited Ling Han to come along, or they would have been greatly troubled by these illusions of holy beasts, and they might have even chosen to give up and leave. She analyzed the map in her mind before setting off again. Chapter 2289 Another Group of People. Chapter 2289 Another Group of People. This time, regardless of what holy beasts appeared, and regardless of how powerful they were, everyone ignored them as they bravely marched forward. This greatly increased their speed, and they walked out of the illusion formation in just an hour. A deep cave appeared before them. However, they immediately frowned when they arrived. This was because there was already another group of people standing before the cave. Upon noticing Ling Han and the others, the group of people also turned around to look at them. There were 7 people in total, with 7 men and 2 women. Moreover, they were all from the demon race. "Why have you people come here?" someone from the group asked. "I should be the one asking this question," Celestial Maiden Yunhe said in a solemn voice. A demon stepped forward and said, "Oh, you're Celestial Maiden Yunhe from the Jiluo clan, right?" Judging by the others' reactions, this demon was most likely their leader. Celestial Maiden Yunhe observed them for a while before saying, "Jian Hu from the Baoyu clan?" "That's me," the demon said with a nod. He exuded a domineering aura as he stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Celestial Maiden Yunhe's expression tensed up, and she whispered to her companions, "The Baoyu clan is a powerful 9th Lotus clan, and Baoyu Jian Hu is more so a prodigy of the younger generation. Right now, he's studying at the 9 Soaring Academy." 9 Soaring Academy? Expressions of fury spread across everyone's face. Around 1 million years ago, Yu Yuan had been defeated by a freak from the 9 Soaring Academy. It was because of this that they could only place 72nd. Otherwise, the 100 Battles Academy could have ranked even higher. Thus, they naturally had no good feelings for the 9 Soaring Academy. In any case, Celestial Maiden Yunhe, how did those people also get here? Someone asked. This was a key question. Even with a map, they had still gone through so many struggles to get here. If it were said that Baoyu Jian Hu and the others had made it here by luck, who would believe it? Celestial Maiden Yunhe furrowed her delicate brows. After a moment, she said, "The Jiluo clan obtained the map from an auction. However, they sold several copies of the map, and the Baoyu clan also obtained one." Everyone frowned upon hearing this. The ancient tomb was indeed dangerous, but the greatest dangers in life often came from other living things. "Oi, dude over there, are you trying to lose the face of our demon race? You're actually teaming up with a bunch of angels," someone said to Ling Han. Their voice was filled with disdain. Indeed, angels were opposed to demons, and it would already be a good outcome if they didn't fight. Mingling together was nothing short of a miracle. Ling Han grinned and said, "And what are you going to do?" A demon leaped forward. His face was twisted with malice and rage, and he shouted, "Fuck, I'm going to kill you, you degenerate." Meanwhile, the angels beside Celestial Maiden Yunhe continued to chatter and laugh. They had their arms crossed before their chests, and it was as if this had completely nothing to do with them. First of all, this was an internal conflict between demons, so it indeed had nothing to do with them. Second of all, Ling Han was far too powerful, so they didn't need to help him at all. Even Celestial Maiden Yunhe showed no signs of interfering. She simply turned to Baoyu Jian Hu and said, "Control your own people. Otherwise, don't run to me in regret afterward." Baoyu Jian Hu sneered in reply. He simply disregarded this as Celestial Maiden Yunhe making an empty show of strength. Seeing no opposition from Baoyu Jian Hu, the demon immediately lunged at Ling Han. With a pressing motion, his hands transformed into a mountain of arrows. Whoosh! Tens of thousands of arrows whistled forward, yearning to pierce Ling Han and kill him. Pa! Ling Han casually swung his palm, upon which the demon was sent flying backward. He tumbled through the air, violently spitting blood and teeth as he did so. "So you're actually a monarch tier," Baoyu Jian Hu said in a solemn voice. The demon who had been sent flying was a 4th Severance Emperor tier. Meanwhile, it was during the 5th Severance when a monarch tier would possess the greatest advantage over an emperor tier. As such, it was no surprise that Ling Han had ended a battle with a single strike. Baoyu Jian Hu became even more infuriated. A mighty monarch tier was actually riding on the coattails of Celestial Maiden Yunhe. Was he trying to sink the demon race's face into the abyss? I said you'd regret it, Celestial Maiden Yunhe said, adding fuel to the fire. They were competition, so it was best to shoo them away as soon as possible. This naturally enraged Bao Yujian Hu even further. Then let me experience his power, he said with a humph. Hu Niu leaped forward. Her finger was pointed at Bao Yujian Hu, and she wore an expression of arrogance as she said, "Ugly bastard, Niu will destroy you." "You ugly bastard?" Bao Yujian Hu stammered with a stiff expression. He was a rare handsome man of the demon race, okay? It was simply because they belonged to different races that their perception of beauty was different. Anyhow, she actually dared to call him an ugly bastard. Toxic woman, I can't forgive you. He lunged forward, intent on giving Hu Niu a vicious lesson. Who's scared of whom? Hu Niu was unfazed as she charged forward. Peng, peng, peng. The two people immediately broke into a battle. To everyone's surprise, it was actually Hu Niu who was enjoying the upper hand. Moreover, this was a significant upper hand. This was only natural. Hu Niu had originally possessed the talent to become a monarch star, and it was only because there weren't enough source powers of heaven and earth, and because she only had the brand of a ninth heaven celestial king that she hadn't been able to cultivate a ninth divided soul. However, she was still a top talent among monarch tiers. Now that she had cultivated the regulations of the foreign realm, she had more so elevated her battle prowess to an even higher level. In reality, her true battle prowess was already no weaker than that of monarch stars. How could Bao Yujian Hu rival this? The young lady whooped and shouted, and as she swung her dainty fists, she appeared as beautiful as could be. However, the might of her attacks was immense, and Bao Yujian Hu was completely suppressed by her power. After several dozen more exchanges, the young lady sent Bao Yujian Hu flying with a violent kick. She obtained a flawless victory. This was only a battle at the severing mundane tier. If they had been at a higher cultivation level, Hu Niu's battle prowess would have given her an even greater advantage. It was only after reaching the dividing soul tier that the gulf between monarch stars and monarch tiers became more apparent. The demons on Bao Yujian Hu's team were deeply astonished. They hurriedly helped Bao Yujian Hu up before turning around to flee. In fact, even the angels on Celestial Maiden Yunhe's team were transfixed with shock. They indeed knew that Hu Niu was a monarch tier, yet they hadn't imagined that her battle prowess was also so formidable. This kind of battle prowess was quite unusual. How could the gulf between fellow monarch tiers be so great? Niu is indeed powerful, Hu Niu said with her hands on her hips. She was brimming with smugness, and she appeared very beautiful like this. Celestial Maiden Yunhe suppressed the shock in her mind before taking a deep look at Hu Niu. Only after a brief moment did she say, "Let's head inside." They entered the cave. It was pitch black inside, and there was also an indescribable stench of decay. This was a pungent smell. After arriving at the end of the cave, they found a large corpse that had lain at rest for heaven knew how many years. It was mostly decayed, with only its skeleton remaining. It was draped in a golden robe, and it was emitting an intense stench. What kind of joke was this? Someone couldn't help but say, "This is the ancient tomb. This is the ancient corpse." Celestial Maiden Yunhe shook her head. She pointed at the corpse, and said, "Move this corpse away." Everyone exchanged glances, and two people immediately stepped forward to remove the corpse. "Huh! There's another cavern behind this corpse," the two people exclaimed. Ling Han also looked over. Sure enough, the large corpse had blocked the cavern behind it, making this place seem like the end of the cave. Whoosh! After moving the corpse a small distance, a powerful suction force suddenly appeared, and it was as if it wanted to suck all of them into the cavern. However, because this suction force was too powerful, peng! The corpse was pulled back, blocking the entrance to the cavern again. The suction force instantly vanished. The two angels responsible for moving the corpse exchanged a glance before saying, "Come, let's pull harder." Their eyes were slightly red. They had actually failed to resist the suction force and move the corpse. This was fairly embarrassing. Chapter 2290, Entering the Cavern. Chapter 2290, Entering the Cavern. 2/5 Severance cultivators had actually failed to move a corpse. Was this not a hilarious joke? They went to move the corpse again, and they both exerted their full strength. One side of the corpse was easily moved, yet when that cavern was slightly exposed, that overwhelming suction force appeared again. Regardless of how red-faced with exertion the two people became, their attempts to move the corpse were simply futile. They couldn't move it another inch. However, they had already been embarrassed once, so how could they bear to fail again? They both gave it their absolute all. Wung, wung, wung. Numerous symbols shone on their bodies as their wings beat rapidly. Pa! There was a flash of red, and the arm of one angel was surprisingly torn off, sending blood spurting through the air. The other angel was freaked out by this sight, and he hurriedly let go of the corpse. The corpse was instantly sucked back, blocking the entrance to the cavern again. Fine, the person who had suffered the torn arm said. As he channeled the power within him, the power of regulations enveloped him, causing a new arm to immediately grow out. This consumed a certain amount of his blood essence and power of regulations. As long as they didn't suffer extreme wounds, cultivators above the severing mundane tier could all recover at a rapid speed. This was because they didn't need to expel foreign martial intent. How did you get wounded? Is there something strange about this corpse? Celestial Maiden Yunhe asked in a grave voice. No, the person said with a shake of their head. Slightly embarrassed, he continued, I exerted too much strength, and it was because of this that I lost my arm. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. However, this was quickly replaced by a feeling of shock. He had actually exerted so much strength that he pulled an arm off. Just how hard was he pulling? More importantly, he had already exerted so much strength, yet he still couldn't move that corpse. The immense power of the suction force was clear for all to see. Moreover, this corpse was far too sturdy, was it not? It had already been reduced to bones, and it was eternally at the mercy of this suction force, yet it still remained intact. This was truly astonishing. This robe is most likely a precious treasure, someone said with sparkles in their eyes. They stared at the robe on the corpse. Everyone nodded in agreement. This robe had been able to resist the power of the suction force, so its defensive ability could at least rival that of 4th Severance Emperor tiers. This was the cultivation level of the two angels just then. A 5th Severance Monarch tier stepped forward, and said, let me try. Another 5th Severance Monarch tier came forth, and said, I'll give you a hand. They grabbed the corpse together, one taking its left hand and one taking its right. They then pulled at it with force. The corpse was shuffled over, and the suction force instantly appeared again, as violent as could be. The two Monarch tiers exerted their full strength, and the veins on their foreheads were already bulging. This completely ruined their beauty, and it made them appear extremely savage. Their wings continued to flap, and their legs also rose into the air. However, even though the corpse was easy to move, trying to completely move it aside was as difficult as ascending the heavens. It was almost an impossible task. In order to avoid a similar fate to the angel before, they quickly abandoned their attempt. How can this be? Everyone asked in shock. How in the world could they enter? Even though they could create a small opening, what would they do if they were sucked in? After all, who knew what kinds of dangers lay inside? This place was filled with an eerie air, so who would be silly enough to believe that a paradise lay inside the cavern? Why don't we remove its robe first? Someone suggested. The corpse had already decayed, so as long as they removed its robe, the corpse would presumably be sucked into the cavern with ease. At that time, the entrance to the cavern would also be exposed. This suggestion won the support of the others. They felt like this was a good idea. Linghan didn't oppose this suggestion, either. He simply frowned, feeling an indescribable sense of unease. They started to remove the corpse's robe, yet they quickly discovered that the buttons of the robe were incredibly difficult to undo. After almost an hour, they finally managed to undo a single button. They instantly cheered in delight. There was finally a glimmer of hope. They continued to encourage themselves, and after an entire day, they finally managed to undo all of the buttons on the robe. Whoosh! The robe slapped onto the entrance of the cavern. Plop! After fluttering for a brief moment, it was instantly sucked inside. The corpse then collapsed as well, with its hundreds of bones flying into the cavern like meteors. Not good. Before Ling Han could react, he had already lost control of his body. He was sucked toward the cavern. Not only him, but everyone else was lifted off their feet and sucked toward the cavern as well. This suction force was far too terrifying. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and some others flapped their wings furiously, trying their best to stabilize themselves in the air, yet their attempts were futile, and their struggles were insignificant before the power of the suction force. Whoosh! They were all sucked into the cavern. Their bodies tumbled around, and they all felt so nauseous that they wanted to vomit. In fact, several people fainted, after which bile was thrown from their mouths. After at least 30 minutes, they finally saw an expanse of blinding white light before them. Peng, 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 peng. They landed one after another, slamming into the ground. However, they didn't feel any pain at all. This was a snowy mountain. No wonder it was so white and so bright, and no wonder their fall wasn't painful as expected. Everyone groaned as they crawled up. Even the few people who had fainted opened their eyes in a daze. However, they immediately started to violently vomit again. They were still feeling terrible. "Where is this?" they all asked. Celestial Maiden Yunhe was slightly pale. It was clear that the person who had drawn the map had never entered this place before, yet they had tricked others by saying that this was the tomb of some ancestral king. Their aim was to raise the price of that map. From the fact that they had sold 2 copies of the same map, it was already clear that the seller was lacking in integrity. From here on in, everything would be unfamiliar. This place was potentially fraught with danger. Someone clasped their head and said, "The bones have scattered everywhere, but that robe is nowhere to be seen." They hadn't managed to obtain anything. In fact, this was to be expected. With a single gust of wind, that robe could have been carried anywhere on the mountain. "Let's head back and take a look first." They wanted to check their path of retreat. They knew not of north, south, east, and west in this region, and their chaotic arrival just then also prevented them from knowing where they had come from. However, this didn't matter. As long as they could determine the direction of the wind, they would know where they had come from. They had been sucked in here, so they could presumably find the exit as long as they traveled following the wind. They set off, and it wasn't long before they discovered a cave on the side of the mountain. However, the winds that gushed out from the cave were far too violent, and they were immediately sent flying once they neared it. They couldn't resist them at all. After several tries, they had no option but to dejectedly give up. With their current strength, they had to admit that they couldn't overcome the power of these winds. "We have no option but to find another exit." They observed their surroundings. It was a sheet of white, and they couldn't see any other color. "Let's go. Perhaps we can still find that robe." This was at least some motivation. Just as they were about to set off, a loud screech of an eagle suddenly traveled over from the sky. They all looked up, only to see a mighty vulture soaring through the sky. Its wingspan measured 30 meters, and even though this was insignificant compared to those colossal monsters, it was radiating with an aura that instilled chilling fear in one's mind. The silver vulture also noticed them. It shot a glance at them, and this caused everyone's heart to shudder. They felt indescribably terrible. This holy beast is incredibly powerful. It's at least at the 8th lotus. Their expressions changed drastically. If they were targeted by an 8th lotus holy beast, and if they had no path of retreat, their only option would be death. Where do we flee? Chapter 2291 Youth. Chapter 2291 Youth. The silver vulture gave a violent screech as it instantly folded its wings and swooped down. Its wings cut through the air like sharp blades, creating a vacuum in its surroundings. It was as quick as lightning. "Go to the cavern entrance," Ling Han shouted. At the same time, he grabbed Hunyo and the others as he immediately dashed away. The others all faltered briefly before immediately coming to their senses. They also ran back to the cavern entrance. The silver vulture forcefully beat its wings, changing its rapid dive into a quick glide. It then extended its claws, grabbing at Ling Han and the others. It was truly a powerful holy beast. It was clearly still dozens of meters away from them, yet the permeation of its terrifying might was so overwhelming. that they felt as if their skin were about to tear. Only Ling Han was unfazed. His cultivation level had fallen, yet his physique hadn't become weaker. It was still incredibly powerful. In fact, he could face this attack head-on and still remain unfazed. How could he feel uncomfortable with the mere might of the 8th Lotus Holy Beast alone? The arrival of the Silver Vulture's attack was imminent. Peng! However, its entire body was blasted back by the wind, and it couldn't put up any resistance at all. In the face of that terrifying wind, even a cultivation of the 8th Lotus was useless. Everyone roared with laughter. Not only had they escaped from great danger, but they had even caused that Silver Vulture to become so disheveled. They had exacted revenge, and this filled them with delight. After a while, the Silver Vulture composed itself, and violently swooped toward them again. Peng! However, when it arrived in the region of the violent winds, it was instantly grabbed by the air currents and sent flying into the distance. It instantly vanished from sight. Big Bird, why don't you come again, huh? Hunyo waved her arms at the large vulture, provoking it to attack again. Come on, we're waiting for you here, the others also shouted in a mocking tone. The Silver Vulture circled in the sky. However, it didn't make any reckless moves to attack them again. It had already developed deep apprehension for those powerful winds. It attempted to attack them several more times, yet it ultimately chose to give up. With a flap of its wings, it flew into the distance. Ling Han and the others didn't dare to let their guard down. Instead, they remained alert, afraid that the large vulture would suddenly return again. After waiting for 3 days, and seeing no sign of the large vulture in the sky, they finally descended the mountain and set off again. This time, however, they didn't dare to fly through the sky. Doing so would make them a huge target. They traversed across the land, but it wasn't long before everyone trained their gaze on Ling Han. This was because his entire body was red, making him stick out like a sore thumb against the snow-covered land. Ling Han chuckled in response. With a single thought, his skin instantly became snow-white. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others were all astonished. Even though changing the color of one's skin was extremely easy, ordinary monarch tears were far too proud to do such a thing. Changing one's own appearance was naturally a humiliating act. However, before they had even complained, Ling Han had already taken the initiative to change his own skin color. This was absolutely astounding. What they didn't know was that Ling Han's identity as a demon was already a disguise in the first place. Thus, he naturally couldn't care less about changing his skin color. This person knows when to yield and when not to yield. How terrifying. Even though they didn't fly, their speed was still insane, and they arrived at the foot of the mountain in no time. Their vision was still filled with endless snow. Although they were all at the severing mundane tier, if they stayed here for too long, they would still feel a spine-chilling cold. They headed away from the mountain, and after walking for around 10 days, they finally exited the snowy plains. They saw an expanse of lush green before them, and this rejuvenated their spirits. The snowy plains had transformed into a boundless stretch of grassy plains. Along with it, their mood also brightened up. They continued forward, and the grassy plains also remained unchanging. In some places, the grass was only an inch long, while in other places, it would reach almost a meter in height. In fact, there were even places where the grass would become several meters tall. It was much like a miniature forest. After walking for so many days, they finally decided to stop for a rest. After all, they had come across a holy beast before, so it was best to remain vigilant. As such, they chose to rest amid a patch of tall grass. They would use the grass as a natural camouflage. They made the most of every minute to rest. After traveling for so many days, they indeed felt slightly fatigued. Everyone was suddenly astonished by the sound of rapidly approaching footsteps. "Eyes a person," they immediately exclaimed. This could be determined by them thanks to the pattern of the footsteps. The being only had 2 legs, so this pretty much eliminated everything apart from humanoid beings. Perhaps someone had arrived here before them? They all shook their heads. This was extremely unlikely. After all, they had only arrived here after removing the corpse that had blocked the entrance to the cavern. Of course, They couldn't discount the possibility that someone had shrunk down in size and created a small gap to enter. They are close. They all prepared for battle. Judging by the speed of the person, their cultivation level wasn't high. Whoosh! A figure soared past overhead, allowing them to observe them clearly. This was a youth who was only 15 or 16 years old. He was shirtless, and even though he wasn't tall, his body was firm with muscles. He was from the angel race, and he had a pair of wings on his back. However, these wings were pitifully small. At full stretch, they only measured a mere 60 centimeters across. Surprisingly, however, there was also a pair of horns on his head. This was clearly a unique feature of the demon race. The youth held an iron trident in his right hand, and the golden wrist guard on his forearm also reflected the dazzling light. Ling Han and the others immediately understood why this youth was fleeing. This was because a gigantic silver wolf was bounding after him, attempting to capture him. However, they immediately calmed down. This wolf was only at the 4th leaf of the 5th lotus. In other words, they could defeat it with a single glare. However, the youth was only at the 2nd leaf of the 5th lotus, which put him at a huge disadvantage against the wolf. He was naturally no match for it. After the youth and wolf passed, they all stood back up. With their cultivation, concealing themselves from this person and wolf was no difficult task. They exchanged glances, and they could all see the astonishment on each other's faces. This was because this youth was clearly too weak to have entered from that cavern entrance on the snowy mountain. This was an indigenous person. Just where in the world was this place? They followed the youth, and they were in no hurry to interfere. The youth continued to flee, yet his speed was no match for the wolf's. The distance between them grew smaller and smaller. In less than 15 minutes, the wolf arrived behind him, and it swiped at the youth's exposed back with a stretch of its right paw's claws. Right at this moment, the youth let out a loud roar as he stamped his right foot and suddenly turned around. He faced the gigantic wolf, and violently thrust his iron trident forward. The wolf extended its claws to block, yet it actually failed to push the trident aside. It was as if the youth's strength had instantaneously grown by a great amount. Pu. The trident stabbed the wolf's left eye, sinking deep into its skull. Peng. The wolf counterattacked, sending the youth flying. However, it had no energy to continue pursuing him. Instead, it continued to jump around, with blood spraying from its left eye. It howled in grief. Pu. The trident finally fell out, and the wolf used its remaining right eye to search for the youth. It wanted to kill him. However, even though the wolf didn't see Ling Han, it saw the dozen or so other people. It had suffered severe wounds, and even its brain had been heavily wounded. As such, how could it still think properly? Upon seeing people, it immediately lunged over with no hesitation at all. P*SS off, a monarch tear shouted. Pa. The wolf instantly transformed into a cloud of blood. Chapter 2292, Strange Wrist Guard. Chapter 2292, Strange Wrist Guard. A mere Genesis tier demonic beast was nothing but trash before a 5th Severance monarch tier. It was ripped apart by a single roar. My wolf! My wolf! The youth exclaimed as he crawled up from the floor. There was a bleeding wound on his lower abdomen, yet he didn't pay any heed to this. Instead, he was dazed as he stared at the remains of the wolf with a dejected expression. Give me my wolf back, the youth shouted. His daze suddenly transformed into fury, and he instantly tuned around to yell at the monarch tier. The monarch tier was extremely displeased. Just what kind of status did he possess? Yet, a mere 5th Lotus cultivator dared to yell at him? Absolutely ludicrous. He raised a hand and pointed at the youth. Even if he didn't kill him, he would give him a bitter lesson. Ling Han chuckled as he casually waved a hand. Peng. The monarch tier was instantly sent flying. He's still a youth, and you indeed destroyed his spoils of battle. Is chiding you wrong? Bewitching Maiden Ru was increasingly familiar with Ling Han, and she immediately stepped forward to say, Little brother, tell this older sister, why were you engaged in such a risky hunt? She practiced charm techniques, so she could subdue others without lifting a single finger. Even though her cultivation had been suppressed to the 5th Severance, She had still advanced to become a monarch tier, after all. This allowed her to become stronger against those at the same cultivation level. Moreover, the youth was only at the Genesis tier, so he more so couldn't resist her charm techniques. The youth felt as if the woman before him was as beautiful as a holy saint. He involuntarily wanted to obey her words, and he replied, "Today's my coming-of-age ceremony, so I need to hunt prey that's stronger than me. That way, I can prove my worth to join the hunting team." "What's your name? And where are you from?" Bewitching Maiden Rue asked. "My name is Yongqin," the youth replied. Intoxicated, he then said, "I'm from the Mahan tribe. Big sister, you're so beautiful." A proud smile involuntarily spread across Bewitching Maiden Rue's face. The youth's final remark certainly wasn't because of her charm techniques. Instead, he truly found her beautiful from the bottom of his heart. This praise made her extremely happy. "Big sister, I'll give you 10 items of prey to ask for marriage. Will you marry me?" Yongqin asked. He surprisingly started to propose. Everyone involuntarily laughed. This youth was truly interesting. Bewitching Maiden Rue wore a proud expression as she said, "I'm already married." Disappointment instantly washed over Yongqin's face. It was as if his life had lost all meaning. "Young man, can you show me your wrist guard?" Ling Han asked. He gazed at the wrist guard on the youth's forearm. An alert expression instantly spread across Yongqin's face. "What are you trying to do?" "That's right, who are you people?" He had actually revealed his identity in a daze. "How uncanny." Ling Han smiled, and said, "We're not bad people. You can completely trust us." Yongqin naturally wouldn't believe him. His expression remained skeptical. "Little brother, you need to trust us," Bewitching Maiden Rue said. There was a glimmer in her eyes. Yongqin involuntarily nodded. "This wrist guard can't be removed. Unless I die." Ling Han was astonished. He grabbed the youth's hand, and carefully observed the wrist guard. Just then, the youth had been able to kill the wolf thanks to his tactic of purposefully fleeing to encourage an attack from the wolf. At the last moment, he launched a sudden strike to gain the upper hand. However, another reason for his success was this wrist guard, which suddenly glowed with a brilliant light the moment that he attacked. It bestowed him with more power. However, unlike the treasures that Ling Han was familiar with, this wrist guard wasn't decorated with any tool symbols. Even though there were patterns, these were simply decorations. This made him feel extremely curious. Others weren't as observative as him. After all, Ling Han had acted as the ruler of a heaven and earth for a period of time. Thus, he was now extremely sensitive to changes in power and regulations. In any case, even if the others noticed this detail, they wouldn't pay any heed to it. That was simply a tool at the fifth lotus, so how could it catch their attention? Ling Han carefully observed the wrist guard. Apart from being exquisitely beautiful, there was nothing else special about it. He became even more curious. He used his divine sense to observe its internals, yet this immediately led to an unforeseen accident. With a crack, the wrist guard suddenly shattered. A part before falling from the young man's wrist. "Ah!" Yongqin exclaimed in astonishment. His expression became dejected, and he shouted, "My wrist guard! My wrist guard!" His shouts were filled with grief. With the wrist guard falling to the ground, it was easy to see the needle-sized hole on the young man's wrist. However, Genesis tier cultivators possessed decent recovery ability, so it wasn't long before this wound disappeared. This wound had most likely been left by the wrist guard. The youth had stated that his wrist guard couldn't be removed unless he was killed. Perhaps this needle-sized wound was what the wrist guard used to observe his life force. Ling Han let Bewitching Maiden Rue console the youth. Meanwhile, he picked up the broken wrist guard and started to carefully examine it. He was immediately astonished by the intricate nature of its internals. It was filled with thin threads, though these threads had already been messed up now. It was as if the precious tool had self-destructed. Forbidding others from observing its construction, Ling Han pondered for a brief moment. His strength was far above the upper limit of this wrist guard, so when his divine sense entered it, the wrist guard was naturally unable to resist. This most likely activated its self-destruct mechanism. Strange. Far too strange. If this precious tool had a tool spirit, was the most important thing not to protect its own life? Why would it choose to self-destruct? Meanwhile, the youth stopped his fit thanks to the comforting words of bewitching Maiden Rue. However, he still wore an ashen expression. According to him, precious treasures like this wrist guard were extremely valuable in his tribe. They were symbols of status. If they were destroyed, their owners would also be belittled and disdained by the rest of the tribe. Ling Han was extremely interested, and he said, "Let's go and take a look at his tribe." Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others didn't have any better suggestions, so they nodded in agreement after exchanging a few glances. They set off with the youth. However, they only arrived at the camp described by the youth after traveling for 3 days. It was a collection of tents that were placed in a circular shape. Several days ago, the youth had left by himself to hunt a wild beast that was stronger than him. This was in order to complete his coming-of-age ceremony. "Yongqin," someone shouted. There was a woman standing at the entrance of the camp, and she started waving at the youth from very far away. "Mom," the youth exclaimed. He also waved his hand as he ran toward the woman. "Son, you didn't get injured, did you?" the woman asked as she embraced the youth. She looked him up and down with a caring expression. "Mom, I'm fine," Yongqin said. It was clear that he was slightly embarrassed before everyone else. "Where's your wrist guard?" the woman immediately exclaimed upon noticing its disappearance. "That's a long story," Ling Han said as he walked over. "Who are you people?" the woman asked with an alert expression. She was surprisingly at the 6th lotus, though she had only reached the first leaf. She didn't have a wrist guard, but she instead wore a shoulder guard. At this moment, it was already glowing with a faint light. This was most likely a precious tool similar to the youth's wrist guard. Ling Han smiled faintly, and replied, "Outsiders who accidentally arrived here." This woman was a pure demon. With this in mind, the youth's father was most likely a member of the angel race. After all, he was a mixed-blood child. As they spoke, more members of the tribe had already wandered over. They all stared at Ling Han and the others, and they were each holding an iron trident. Moreover, they were all wearing helmets, chest plates, knee guards, wrist guards, and similar types of precious tools. They all wore cautious expressions. Chapter 2293, Truly Strange. Chapter 2293, Truly Strange. Ling Han raised his hands, and said, "We have no evil intentions. We only arrived here by accident." An elder walked out from among the people. There was a walking stick in his hand, and he was already fully bald. His white eyebrows hung down on the sides, and it was clear that he had already lived for many years. His eyes were filled with wisdom, and he asked, "From where have you come? For what reason have you come?" Ling Han gave a brief summary of their experiences without explicitly hiding anything. If he wanted to win their trust, it was best not to tell any lies. In any case, there was no need for him to lie anyway. After hearing his story, the members of the tribe all wore astonished expressions. There was actually a bigger world outside this heaven and earth. These tribespeople didn't have any malicious intentions. Since Ling Han had treated them with honesty, they naturally paid him back with honesty. They told him the secrets of this land. In fact, their story was very simple. They had lived here for generation after generation, and their greatest ambition was simply to stay alive. This was because this land had very scarce resources. If they wanted to survive, they needed to hunt powerful beasts. Alternatively, they could compete for the herbivores with these carnivorous wild beasts. Ling Han and the others were quite surprised. After reaching the 2nd lotus, which was equivalent to the spiritual pedestal tier of the celestial realm, cultivators could survive simply by breathing spiritual qi. After reaching the mountain river tier, one wouldn't die even if their spiritual qi were exhausted. They would simply become extremely weak. However, the people here were all at the 5th lotus or 6th lotus, yet they still worried about survival. Was this not strange? Hang on. After hearing the tribespeople's explanation, Ling Han and the others also noticed that something was off. Their strength had surprisingly weakened a bit. Perhaps we've eaten too little? They had only eaten a single meal these past 10 days, so perhaps this had affected their strength. This was inconceivable. The spiritual chi here is almost exhausted. It's almost impossible to cultivate, they exclaimed. They should have discovered this upon arriving at this place. However, they only realized it now, and it was as if there were some mysterious power affecting their cognitive ability. Fuck. Where in the hell is this? Everyone was slightly scared. If they didn't eat, they would actually risk death. If they told this to anyone else, they would be laughed off like a clown. Now, however, this was a very real threat. Since spiritual chi is deficient, how are those holy beasts cultivating? Ling Han asked. They had reached their cultivation level by eating. Even though this place had little spiritual chi, it did still exist, after all. It was simply that one couldn't extract this spiritual chi through normal methods. Only the plants that grew on the land could absorb this spiritual chi. After ingesting these plants, the herbivorous animals would then naturally have a reserve of spiritual chi. After being hunted and eaten, these herbivorous animals would then provide spiritual chi to the cultivators. Everyone could understand this. However, why would they starve to death if they didn't eat? They quickly learned another piece of vital information. Everyone in the tribe had a limited lifespan. Currently, the record for the oldest person was 800 years old. They had died from natural causes, and not at the hands of a wild beast. Only a mere 800 years. One had to realize that those at the heaven tier could already live for 800 years. After reaching the severing mundane tier, one would more so never need to worry about their lifespan anymore. They simply needed to overcome their immortal's tribulation. Here, however, disease and death were all important matters that people needed to worry about. It's as if immortal's tribulation occurs once a year here. Thus, even the strongest person could only hold on for 800 years before being killed, Ling Han speculated in his mind. This wasn't impossible. After all, there were already cases of people starving to death. That being the case, it wouldn't be impossible for immortal's tribulation to befall more frequently in this heaven and earth. Ling Han asked for more information from the tribe's people. However, even though this tribe was always migrating around, they only did so in a small area 500 kilometers in radius. They couldn't migrate any further. This was because another tribe existed beside them. If they ventured any further, they might potentially trigger a battle. Ling Han was extremely interested in their precious tools, so he started to ask about their origins. All of our armor comes from the holy mountain, the elder replied. According to him, one simply needed to forge their armor and bring it to the holy mountain. After leaving it there for 3 years, they could retrieve it to use. This armor could be used to increase either their offensive ability or their defensive ability. However, it would feed on their blood when they used it, and thus each person could only possess one piece of such armor. If they tried to use more, they would naturally die once their blood essence was exhausted. These pieces of armor were the most valuable asset of this tribe. This was their key to survival. Second to this was food. In fact, both were almost equally as important. As such, the tribespeople neither gifted Ling Han and the others with armor, nor did they welcome them with food. Ling Han and the others hadn't noticed it before, but they discovered that they were incredibly hungry at this moment. It was as if they had truly transformed into ordinary mortals. We most likely entered the territory of some powerful elite. This place is run according to their regulations, so we're also subject to the cycle of life and death. We can also feel hunger and starvation. Everyone reached the same conclusion. However, its effects are so great, and it's even overriding the ordinary regulations of heaven and earth. Just how powerful is this person? Heavenly Venerate, someone asked in a shaky voice. Celestial Maiden Yunhe immediately shook her head, saying, only the regulations within a small region are being affected, so even ancestral kings are capable of this. It's simply the case that the stronger an ancestral king, the larger the region that they can affect. Celestial kings stood equal with the regulations, so it was possible for them to override the regulations of heaven and earth within a small region. However, Even if this were only a 10th Lotus ancestral king, how could Ling Han and the others hope to rival them with their measly power? Eyes most likely beneath an ancestral king to engage in such behavior, Ling Han said. Ancestral kings couldn't be so bored and silly. Perhaps this ancestral king has already passed away. Or maybe they've been severely wounded and trapped in an unconscious state. Ling Han wasn't overly worried. If it truly came to the worst, he could unleash the might of the Black Tower to forcefully break free from this place. However, if he did this, the Black Tower might truly become a crippled tower. It would lose all of its power. Thus, unless it was absolutely necessary, he definitely wouldn't use the Black Tower again. Ling Han wore a faint smile as he retrieved some food from the Black Tower. The tribespeople instantly started to drool upon seeing this. Not only them, but the eyes of Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others also glimmered with greed. After reaching their cultivation level, they would only store stones and celestial medicines in their spatial god tool. How could they have any food? Food for armor. Deal or no deal? He asked with a smile. Don't lie to me. There are definitely new pieces of armor lying around. The tribespeople salivated as they stared at the food. Esteemed guest, you have to realize that the metals and ores used to forge these pieces of armor are extremely difficult to mine, an elder of the tribe said. He was clearly trying to bargain. Ling Han wasn't afraid of them asking for a higher price as long as they were willing to trade. Thus, he smiled and said, I can add some more food. However, the more important thing is, how many items do you have to exchange? The elder smiled, and even the wrinkles on his face smoothed out a little. After bargaining for a while, Ling Han used a large amount of food to trade for a set of armor. He could armor himself from head to toe. However, he was told by the tribespeople that even if someone were incredibly strong, they could at most only wear 2 pieces of armor at once. Otherwise, they would be seeking death. Ling Han nodded in understanding. He then traded for 1 more wrist guard, and tossed it to Yongqin. This was to compensate him for his loss. After that, he started to immediately investigate these pieces of armor. Chapter 2294, Full Set. Chapter 2294, Full Set. However, before starting his investigation, Ling Han was dragged along by the Empress and the others to eat a meal first. Everyone was starving, and there were also peculiar regulations here. While they still maintained their power, they also faced the challenges of ordinary mortals. They would feel thirst, and they would feel hunger. They would even be constricted by a limited lifespan. Thus, they were all extremely anxious to leave this place. Otherwise, they might truly die of old age. Moreover, after the lesson from just then, they would definitely store some food in their spatial god tool in the future. After all, they never knew when it might come in handy. Ling Han generously shared his food with everyone. However, he naturally limited how much food he shared. It was just enough for everyone to relieve their hunger. If they wanted more, no problems. They could trade for more using celestial medicines. This caused everyone to fume. Ling Han was blatantly scamming them in a time of dire need. However, Ling Han was neither stealing nor robbing, even though he was clearly stronger than them. Thus, what could they say? Several people couldn't endure the hunger, so they set off to hunt. Ling Han chuckled upon seeing this. He then entered the Black Tower after satisfying the appetites of Hunyo and the others. Before entering, he first made some gestures with his arm, cutting out a part of the space before him. He then placed 2 unopenable scrolls inside this space. These scrolls couldn't be taken inside the Black Tower, nor could they be placed in his spatial storage rings. They could only remain in heaven and earth. It was as if they were the property of the heavens, things that couldn't leave the gaze of heaven and earth for even a split second. The void naturally belonged to the heavens as well. It was just that very few people entered. Ling Han used the regulations of space to create a stable space before him. This space could remain for a long time without crumbling. These scrolls were truly glorious beings. Each time he entered the Black Tower, he would need to create a space for them first. He sighed as he entered the Black Tower. His body instantly became lighter, and it was as if something that had been weighing down on him had suddenly disappeared at this instant. "Small tower, wake up," Ling Han said. This was the foreign realm, so without the power of heaven and earth from the celestial realm, Small Tower would remain in a state of deep sleep. It wouldn't wake for trivial reasons. "You're wasting my energy again," Small Tower said. Ling Han chuckled, and said, "Observe your surroundings." "What power is this?" Small Tower paused for a moment before replying. "This power is around that of an 8th heaven celestial king, however, it feels completely lifeless. It's most likely that a 9th heaven celestial king passed away, after which his body fused into this heaven and earth, thereby replacing the original regulations of this land. It's also because of this that their power fell to the 8th heaven. A dead celestial king would naturally become weaker than when they were alive. Thus, it was understandable that their power fell from the 9th heaven to the 8th heaven." Ling Han nodded in understanding. As long as this wasn't the power of a heavenly venerate, he could use the might of the Black Tower to break free. At the very least, he had a path of retreat. This filled him with confidence. When that person had sold Celestial Maiden Yunhe the map, they had lied and said that this was the tomb of an ancestral king. Surprisingly, however, his lie had transformed into a reality. This was genuinely the tomb of an ancestral king. Moreover, it was the resting place of an 18th Lotus ancestral king. Are these strange pieces of armor also created by the power of this celestial king? Ling Han picked up a wrist guard. As long as this piece of armor was placed on the so-called Holy Mountain, it would automatically transform into a precious tool. He could only attribute this to the influence of the celestial king. He wore the wrist guard, and he immediately felt a sharp prick on his skin. However, his physique was far too powerful, so the wrist guard failed to penetrate his skin. With a single thought, he reduced the power of his physique. He instantly felt a slight pain, and a thin needle pierced into his skin, stabbing into his vein. Ling Han was astonished. He could feel the wrist guard fusing together with him, and it was as if it had become part of his body. Interesting. With a thought from him, the patterns of the wrist guard immediately lit up, causing a torrent of power to surge into his body. This elevated his battle prowess by a slight amount. However, a drop of his blood was also consumed. This was the price that the tribespeople spoke of? Ling Han was slightly surprised. Even though a drop of his blood had been consumed, this was truly nothing compared to the amount of blood he had. Moreover, his life essence was profound, so as long as his blood essence wasn't consumed, he could endlessly create ordinary blood. Of course, this blood was only ordinary compared to his blood essence. His physique had been tempered using the indestructible Heaven's Scroll, so his ordinary blood was comparable to the blood essence of others. If this is the case, I can wear far more than 2 pieces of armor at once, he murmured to himself. He entered the wrist guard with his divine sense again. However, even though this wrist guard belonged to him, it was still resistant to his observation. It instantly shattered into pieces. This piece of armor isn't as strong as me, so it immediately shattered upon being observed by my divine sense. However, if it was stronger than me, it could most likely keep my divine sense from entering. Otherwise, this kind of armor would be completely meaningless. Enemies would be able to shatter it with a single sweep of their divine sense. Fortunately, I traded for a few more wrist guards. Ling Han wore another wrist guard. Not 1, but 2. The 2 wrist guards lit up in unison. This placed more stress on Ling Han's body, though it was still an insignificant amount. What about 3? What about 4? One after another, Ling Han continued to wear more pieces of armor. Eventually, he was armored from head to toe. However, because the tribespeople had never considered making a full suit of armor, these pieces of armor were extremely incompatible, with clear gaps between the different pieces of armor. However, Ling Han was slightly astounded as he threw a punch. Peng! A burst of energy surged forward, transforming into a terrifying cyclone of energy. My original battle prowess was around the Earth Soul. Now, however, it's reached the Heaven Soul. In fact, it's even slightly more powerful. In other words, a full suit of armor can elevate my battle prowess by a minor tier. This is equivalent to a king tier becoming an emperor tier, an emperor tier becoming a monarch tier, or a monarch tier becoming a monarch star. This was absolutely astounding. This was only a suit of armor, one which wasn't very difficult to obtain, in fact. As long as one forged a billet and placed it on the holy mountain, it would transform into such armor after only 3 years. If this armor can be used in the two-realm battlefield, won't the foreign realm gain a significant advantage? Ling Han mulled over this problem. This secret technique was seemingly confined to this heaven and earth, with no one else aware of its existence. Anyhow, his vitality was far too rich. He felt completely fine even after wearing a full suit of armor. Ling Han exited the Black Tower, and his armored appearance instantly shocked everyone in the surroundings. Divine deity. Upon witnessing Ling Han's appearance, the tribespeople all fell to their knees. They kowtowed to Ling Han, and their expressions were as respectful as could be. They were truly treating him like a divine deity. Meanwhile, Hunyo and the others exchanged a glance. They felt like Ling Han's appearance was slightly stupid. Ling Han hadn't imagined that his get-up would elicit such a strong reaction. Thinking about it carefully, however, the people in the tribe could only wear 2 pieces of armor at most, so it was indeed shocking that he had been able to don a full suit of armor. He laughed before calling Hunyo and the others over. He planned to visit the holy mountain as soon as possible, for the corpse of the 18th Lotus ancestral king most likely lay there. If he could deal with it there, he wouldn't need to use the Black Tower to escape. In addition, he was extremely interested in how these pieces of armor were created. If he could learn the method, he could significantly improve the celestial realm's standing against the foreign realm. Chapter 2295, Holy Mountain. Chapter 2295, Holy Mountain. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others pondered for a moment before hurriedly running over to follow Ling Han. Ling Han was far too powerful, and his mind was also extremely nimble. They couldn't go wrong if they followed him. Ling Han didn't stop them, either. Even though he detested the people of the foreign realm, those who invaded the celestial realm all belonged to the demon race. Not a single one of them belonged to the angel race. Thus, it was extremely difficult for him to hate them. In any case, the angel race was battling against the dark inverse realm on the other side of the foreign realm, so Ling Han naturally wished that they were as powerful as could be. Otherwise, if the dark inverse realm conquered the foreign realm, the next in line to fall would be the celestial realm. Because of this, he decided to give Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others a hand. He would bring them out of this place. The invading claws of the foreign realm needed to be severed. However, the armor that defended them needed to be reinforced. They needed to hold back the invading dark inverse realm. They ventured into the distance, coming across several other tribes in the process. However, they passed these areas peacefully, not triggering any conflict. After a dozen or so days, a large mountain appeared in their vision. It was golden yellow, and it was much like a mountain that had been created from gold. "This is the holy mountain," they all said. According to the information provided by the tribespeople, this was the holy mountain. From the outside, it looked like a mountain that had been forged from gold. However, when they ascended it, it would appear no different from ordinary mountains. For some strange reason, however, it would always look like a golden mountain from afar. From this point on, their journey would start to become dangerous. According to the tribespeople, powerful beasts wander around the foot of the mountain, hunting those who come to ascend the mountain. In fact, the most powerful beast can rival those at the 9th Lotus. If we come across one, we won't even have the opportunity to flee. We must be extremely careful. They quietly chattered among themselves. This place was far too dangerous, and the wild beasts more so wouldn't give a toss about their backgrounds. Regardless of whether they were the successor of a large clan or a student of the 100 Battles Academy, they would be eaten if they were caught. Here, staying alive was their top priority. Ling Han was slightly more confident. Even though his cultivation had been suppressed, his divine demon sword had already advanced to the level of divine metal. Even though it still had yet to reach the level of celestial tool, the domineering nature of its sword chi could already threaten those at the ascending origin tier. Of course, the prerequisite to this was that Ling Han had an opportunity to launch an attack. Otherwise, if an ascending origin tier elite killed him with a single thought, everything would be for naught. In this place, metals were a rare commodity. However, they did still exist. Thus, tribespeople would enter the Holy Mountain every year, transforming ordinary pieces of armor into treasured tools. However, the probability of being killed was also extremely high. As such, it wasn't strange to see pieces of armor littering the ground. This was a common sight. Of course, these billets would also be picked up by others. They wouldn't stay on the ground forever. Ling Han and the others saw several armor billets as they walked toward the Holy Mountain. This was a physical reminder of the cruel reality of this place. People were dying all the time. Crackle. A strange sound ripped through the air, and they looked over to see a gigantic insect appear. Its body was pitch black and covered in a layer of solid armor that reflected a metallic glow. A lotus bloomed on its back, showing 7 petals and 4 leaves. It flapped its cicada-like wings, and it was this that caused the strange sound. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others all wore anxious expressions. This insect was extremely powerful, far exceeding the limits of their battle prowess. They all retrieved their precious armor, yet they still felt a complete lack of confidence. The gulf between them was simply too great. Ling Han strode forward. His suit of armor significantly boosted his battle prowess, allowing him to rival those at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus. "Brother Ba, don't be reckless," Celestial Maiden Yunhe hurriedly shouted in warning. She wasn't worried about Ling Han per se, but rather worried that they would lose their key to leaving this place. The others all nodded in agreement. Against a powerful insect like this, fleeing was naturally the best course of action. According to the tribespeople, the Holy Mountain was a forbidden area for the insect race and the holy beasts. Not a single one of them dared to enter. Thus, they would be safe as long as they fled onto the mountain. "Don't worry, Nyos is the strongest. He can definitely defeat this ugly insect." Hu Nyo was filled with confidence. Fortunately, she had finally become a little smarter, and she didn't directly call Ling Han's name. No one believed her. Those at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus possessed a battle prowess around the 1st leaf of the 7th lotus. The gulf between this and the 4th leaf was far too great. It would be a miracle if Ling Han could win. Crackle. The gigantic insect fluttered its wings as it swooped down at Ling Han. Just the turbulence caused by its flapping wings was already terrifying, with the surrounding air transforming into blades of wind that slashed at Ling Han. Ling Han roared as he threw a fist, with his attack instantly transforming into a giant hammer. Clang, clang, clang. The blades of wind were obliterated. The hammer then raced toward the insect at an incredible speed. Everyone was shocked by this sight. They knew that Ling Han was powerful as he possessed the ability to defeat a monarch tier at the same cultivation level in a single strike. This placed his true battle prowess at the 2nd leaf or even the 3rd leaf of the 7th lotus. However, one's freakish power needed to have a limit, right? After all, his cultivation level was clear for all to see. He still had yet to reach the 7th lotus. However, Ling Han's attack instantly provided them with boundless delight. He could easily rival the attacks of those at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus. They gazed at Ling Han's suit of armor, which was fully glowing at this moment. Even though it couldn't be considered as a genuine set, it still made Ling Han appear extremely domineering and mighty at this moment. Perhaps this is. Celestial Maiden Yunhe's expression instantly became animated. "To also have the same thought," a monarch tier said. His eyebrows jiggled, and it was as if he were about to start dancing. "The Dark Inverse Realm's armor," several people exclaimed in unison. Celestial Maiden Yunhe's face flushed red with excitement, and she was beside herself with delight. The rough billets can transform into battle armor after being placed on the Holy Mountain. Judging from this Holy Mountain definitely has links to the Dark Inverse Realm. We've always wanted to discover the secret behind the Dark Inverse Realm's armor. If we can obtain this secret, our overall battle prowess will rise by a significant amount. At that time, resisting the Dark Inverse Realm will be no problem, and conquering the Celestial Realm will also be far easier than anticipated. In fact, We might even be able to launch a counterattack against the dark inverse realm. After fusing the two dimensions together, even if we don't become a medium-level dimension, we can still at least rise to the top of the low-level dimensions. Even though we've killed several elites from the dark inverse realm at the border, once they die, their armor also self-destructs. As such, we've never been able to discover the secrets behind their armor. Perhaps this is a chance. They were all filled with excitement. If they truly managed to bring a flawless suit of armor back, they would have made a massive contribution to the foreign realm. Perhaps even heavenly venerates would come to commend them. Boom, boom, boom. Meanwhile, Ling Han was still battling against the giant insect. Even though his battle prowess was extremely impressive, the giant insect's shell was a natural layer of armor. It was incredibly hard, and even Ling Han's full power attacks could only leave some dents. However, these dents would quickly recover, and it was as if the insect wasn't being affected at all. As the battle dragged on, Ling Han also discovered that he was becoming increasingly hungry. It was as if his strength had been exhausted, and he was overcome by a feeling of fatigue. This was the peculiar suppression of this heaven and earth. Living beings all had to consume food. Otherwise, they would feel fatigued and exhausted. On the other hand, this giant insect had clearly become familiar with this peculiar environment, so its endurance was far greater than that of Ling Han. If this continued, Ling Han would lose. The excitement was wiped off everyone's face. If the situation didn't improve, they would all die here. Hurry up and ascend the mountain, they said with urgency. Since Ling Han could still rival the giant insect, they needed to seize this opportunity to climb the mountain. Otherwise, they would face certain death. Ling Han shook his head. He then retrieved the divine demon sword. Chapter 2296, Tempted. Chapter 2296, Tempted. Upon appearing in heaven and earth, the divine demon sword pulsed with a chilling glimmer, and radiated with an overwhelming murderous aura. Ling Han roared as he charged forward with sword in hand. The giant insect was unaware of the divine demon sword's might, so it was fearless as it faced Ling Han's attack head-on. Its shell was indeed hard to crack. Without weapons, those at the same cultivation level would be unable to wound it. Ling Han slashed down, causing a brilliant sword light to soar into the air. It was as if he were opening the sky. Pu. The sword light sank into the giant insect's body, piercing it from one end and leaving from the other. Its radiance illuminated the sky. Ling Han dashed past, and the body of the large insect was immediately separated into two. Green blood sprayed through the air as its life force was extinguished. Everyone was speechless with shock. What was going on? Ling Han had clearly been at an absolute disadvantage, yet he had instantly turned the tables after retrieving his sword. In fact, he had achieved victory in a single strike. This was simply unfathomable. Moreover, Ling Han was only at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus, yet he could kill an opponent at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus in the blink of an eye. Was the cultivation level limit still effective against him? Even the iron rule of the cultivation world had become trash. Ling Han swung his sword several more times, dismembering the giant insect. He found a fist-sized emerald green orb in its heart. This was the core of the giant insect's power, and he could extract the power from within it. As for the insect's flesh, Ling Han and the others naturally wouldn't consider it. They wouldn't touch it unless they were starving to death. Brother Ba, how impressive. Celestial Maiden Yunhe was rendered speechless. This person's might had already reached an indescribable level. And that sword. It had destroyed the insect's tough shell in a single slash. It was also unbelievably powerful. This sword is incredible, they all exclaimed in their minds. When Ling Han drew the sword, they all felt a mysterious chill running down their spines. It was as if their skin were being sliced. Their hearts thumped, and their bodies shuddered. Ling Han smiled faintly, and said, "We can climb the mountain now." He was the first to set off, closely followed by the Empress and the others. They were already accustomed to Ling Han's freakish power. As for the others, they were still feeling dazed as they blankly followed after Ling Han. They were like mindless puppets being dragged along by a string. Even though celestial maiden Yunhe was following Ling Han, she was so dazed that she didn't know where she was placing her feet as she walked. There was only Ling Han in her eyes. Even though this demon was extremely ugly and as crude as a pig, she truly couldn't deny his talent in cultivation. Monarch tears at the 5th leaf of the 6th lotus could at most only rival or defeat those at the 1st leaf of the 7th lotus. If they came across someone at the 2nd leaf of the 7th lotus, their only fate would be defeat. This was an iron rule. This was the advantage of one major tier. However, not only could Ling Han easily defeat those at the 2nd leaf and 3rd leaf of the 7th lotus, he had even managed to kill an insect at the 4th leaf of the 7th lotus with a single slash. His immense power caused her heart to flutter. How could monarch tears be so powerful? In fact, even monarch stars weren't so powerful. After all, could a monarch star at the 9th leaf of the 7th lotus defeat someone at the 4th leaf of the 8th lotus? This was not to mention achieving victory in a single strike. She was a prodigious woman, so her standards were naturally as high as could be. Only monarch stars could tempt her heart. However, if they truly courted her, she would still be reserved and consider their character first. Now, however, her body couldn't help but feel hot with excitement whenever she thought about Ling Han's power. A mysterious current of warmth flowed through her body, and she could barely stop herself from leaping into his embrace. She wanted to experience his passionate kiss, his rough fondling, and even the weight of his body on hers as he forcefully. She suddenly jolted awake. She had actually become such a pervert. That's a detestable demon. He's as ugly as a pig. Look at that crimson-red skin, those terrible horns, those strong arms. If he embraces me, I'll definitely be filled with a sense of safety. Pay. Celestial maiden Yunhe hurriedly clasped her head with her hands. Her thoughts had wandered off again. She sighed in her mind. Unfortunately, she had fallen for this barbaric man from the demon race. They set off for the holy mountain. However, their journey was destined to be troublesome, and they quickly came across a golden bear. It was only 30 centimeters tall, and it looked incredibly adorable. However, it was extremely vicious, and it immediately swung its claws upon seeing them. A projection of its claws became tangible as it slashed toward them like a blade. However, the cultivation of this golden bear wasn't high, and it was eventually defeated by bewitching Maiden Rue. However, she didn't kill it, and she instead planned to take it as a pet. Afterward, they came across a holy deer. This beast had the lower body of a deer and the upper body of a human. Its strength was astonishing, and even after retrieving his divine demon sword, Ling Han was still unable to defeat it. In the end, they could only flee in disarray. The gulf between their cultivation had been far too large. As a result, even Ling Han had been helpless. After they fled for 3 days and 3 nights, the holy deer finally gave up on its pursuit. With a flap of its wings, it started flying back to where it had come from. Stinky deer. Nyo is definitely going to eat you. Nyo shouted in anger. Ling Han wiped the cold sweat from his brow. The divine demon's sword wasn't omnipotent. The holy deer had been far too powerful, giving him no chance to strike it with his sword. Thus, the divine demon's sword was useless regardless of how powerful it was. Of course, this was unless the level of the divine demon's sword equaled or even surpassed that of the holy deer. At that time, killing it would be like killing a chicken. Otherwise, weapons would only be inanimate objects, regardless of how sharp they were. There was nothing more Ling Han could do. The regulations of the celestial realm within the divine demon sword couldn't be channeled, so it could only stay at the same level as Ling Han. Of course, if it weren't for the divine demon sword, perhaps they could have still escaped, but it would have been very likely that several of them would have died. In fact, they might have even consumed several life-saving treasures. They rested for several days. During this time, they also had a huge meal to replenish their energy. They then set off for the holy mountain again. However, that holy deer had seemingly set its eyes on them, and it unexpectedly started to attack them again. Ling Han and the others had no option but to flee in disarray again. This occurred time and time again. In the end, half a year passed, yet Ling Han and the others still hadn't managed to enter the holy mountain. This caused them to feel extremely frustrated. If they couldn't leave this place, their lifespan would only be a measly 800 to 1,000 years. They could count their days on their fingers. As mighty Sixth Lotus Emperor Tears and Monarch Tears, they were actually going to die of old age. How vexing. They summarized their experiences and lessons. If they came across the holy deer again, they would flee toward the holy mountain no matter what. Otherwise, they would never be able to reach it. After deciding this, they set off again. Stop. Ling Han suddenly raised a hand. He had heard some slight movement. The long grass in the distance suddenly separated, revealing a group of people. Baoyu Jianhu. Celestial Maiden Yunhe exclaimed. Her pupils contracted upon seeing him. She hadn't imagined that he would return. This was also because they had been trapped here for half a year. Otherwise, if everything had gone smoothly, they would have already obtained the secrets of the precious armor and left long ago. However, Ling Han's gaze was fixed on another person, a single-horned demon. He possessed a large physique, and his tail would occasionally lash around, causing even the air to become a ball of chaos. This person was extremely strong. Ha 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 ha. We meet again, huh? Baoyu Jianhu roared with laughter. However, his voice was cold and dripping with malice. As it turned out, the Baoyu clan hadn't been overly interested in the ancient tomb. Even though it was rumored to be the tomb of an ancestral king, these were beings who were undying and indestructible. How could there be so many ancestral king tombs in the world? It was because of this that their team had been led by Baoyu Jianhu. He had come to investigate the situation first. If this place had truly been worth exploring, Baoyu Jianhu naturally wouldn't have been powerful enough to deal with the situation. As such, he would have returned to ask for assistance. However, to be kicked out before he had even entered. This infuriated the Baoyu clan. Chapter 2297, Transferring Misfortune. Chapter 2297, Transferring Misfortune. The single-horned demon stood up, sweeping its gaze across Ling Han and the others. His voice was calm as he said, "The demon can stay. The rest of you, cut off an arm and *SS off." Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others were all enraged. This person was far too arrogant. Do you people want to die? A vicious glimmer flashed across the single-horned demon's eyes. This was a petrifying glimmer, and the angels couldn't help but feel their chests suddenly tightening. They felt like vomiting blood. This person was far too powerful. Perhaps he was an 8th Lotus elite. Don't make me regret this. Hurry up and *SS off, the single-horned demon said in a baleful voice. Ling Han's expression was solemn. This demon was extremely powerful, he couldn't be underestimated. He chuckled, and asked, "How have we offended you? As a demon, you're actually mingling with these ugly angels. You've lost all of our face," the single-horned demon said in an icy voice. "For degenerates like you, I only offer a single punishment." He paused for a moment before saying in a voice filled with killing intent, "Death." Ling Han shrugged, and said, "But I still haven't lived enough." "You're seeking death," the single-horned demon roared as it immediately charged forward. It pressed down with its hand, causing countless meteors to instantly plummet from the sky. This was a petrifying sight. Ling Han nodded in his mind. This person was indeed powerful. However, he was still far weaker than that holy deer. He retrieved his divine demon sword to meet this attack. Whoosh! A burst of sword chi ripped through the sky. Pa, 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 pa. The meteors that were crashing down on Ling Han instantly exploded into pieces. Meanwhile, the remaining meteors all slammed into the earth, causing the ground to continuously quake. A look of fervor appeared in the single-horned demon's eyes as he gazed at the sword in Ling Han's hands. Brilliant sword. No matter how brilliant it is, it's still got nothing to do with you, Ling Han said with a loud laugh. He charged forward with sword in hand. To fall into your hands. What a waste of a treasure, the single-horned demon said with a sneer. He unleashed projections with his palms, naturally not allowing the sword chi or the divine demon sword to strike him. He simply pushed them aside with his attacks. His cultivation was far superior to Ling Han's, so he was confident that he could shake Ling Han to death with his attacks. He was convinced that Ling Han couldn't unleash the full power of the sword. This was indeed a good plan. With such a huge gulf between their cultivation, it was only natural that their battle prowess wasn't on the same level. However, he was surprised to discover that Ling Han's physique far exceeded his cultivation level. As such, the shock waves from his attacks were but a tickle for Ling Han. Only that holy deer had been able to truly threaten Ling Han. They continued to battle. The single-horned demon's expression transformed from disdainful to solemn. However, this quickly transformed into a deep frown. He had never come across a sixth lotus cultivator so difficult to kill before. Was this person truly at the sixth lotus? Even among those at the seventh lotus, few people were so freakish. Right at this moment, a dark shadow suddenly fell over them. Ling Han and the others had already developed a subconscious reaction to this, and they all shouted, "Flee!" They instantly sprinted away, fleeing faster than hunted rabbits. In a stroke of fortune, they could use the people from the Baoyu clan to attract the attention of this holy beast. What good people! The single-horned demon involuntarily grimaced. Ling Han was actually fleeing just like this. He was fleeing. Fucking fleeing. He wanted to give chase, yet the dark shadow from above had already enveloped him. He looked up, only to see a holy deer. It had the lower body of a deer and the upper body of a human. Right now, its arms were spread apart, and it was condensing numerous crackling white lightning orbs in its hands. Just a single glance at this holy deer sent cold chills down the single-horned demon's spine. "Retreat! Hurry up and retreat," he shouted in panic. This holy deer was far too powerful. He couldn't rival it unless he unleashed his trump cards. Even then, however, he would only be able to defend. Trying to achieve victory would be as difficult as trying to ascend the heavens. This time, the holy deer didn't pursue Ling Han and the others. Instead, it focused its gaze on the demons from the Baoyu clan. Perhaps it had grown tired of its old playthings, so it wanted to play with some new toys. It started its hunt, forcing the single-horned demon to use his trump card. This was a fruit that allowed him to elevate his battle prowess. He could rival the holy beast without falling to a disadvantage. However, it was still impossible for him to achieve victory. Ling Han and the others took advantage of this opportunity to flee. Not long ago, they had already decided to flee toward the holy mountain no matter what. An hour passed, and they finally succeeded in making it to the foot of the holy mountain. They took their first step to climb the mountain. After taking this step, the scene before them immediately changed. The dazzling golden mountain surprisingly became dull and desolate. Black air rose from the ground, transforming into all kinds of eerie and uncanny shapes. "This is the holy mountain." They all shook their heads. This was obviously a dead mountain. "Let's go." They started to climb the mountain. Following the path described by the tribespeople, they eventually arrived at a valley. They then looked up. The valley was extremely steep, and it was surrounded by plunging cliffs. The floor of the valley was more so littered with razor-sharp stones. If it were only this, no one would worry too much. The problem was, however, that the gravity in this place was unexpectedly powerful. Even raising their feet was difficult. Once they fell, death was all but certain. In any case, why did they need to climb these cliffs? The answer was simple. If they wanted to transform these rough billets into pieces of precious armor, they needed to place them inside the faces of the cliffs. Why couldn't they place them at the foot of the cliffs? They could indeed do this. However, one couldn't forget that more than one tribe lived in this region. In order to obtain food, there would often be skirmishes or even full-blown wars among these tribes. Thus, if they placed the billets at the foot of the cliffs, would that not equate to gifting them to others? One had to realize that metal ores were an incredibly valuable commodity in this place. In fact, they were even more valuable than food. As such, they would all try their best to climb the faces of the cliff. They would then dig a hole in which they placed the rough billets. The higher up they dug the hole, the better their billets would be hidden, and the smaller the chance their valuables would be stolen by others. Ling Han and the others had no interest in the rough billets. Instead, they wanted to witness the secret behind how these billets evolved into precious treasures. They searched around the valley, trying to discover the reason behind the evolution of the billets. The tribespeople viewed the holy mountain with great respect and reverence, and this was clear from the name that they gave it. Thus, they naturally didn't dare to damage its environment. However, Ling Han and the others were different. They dug 1 meter deep, and if they needed to, they would even flatten this entire valley. However, the gravity here was far too powerful, so much so that even standing upright was a tiring task. This was not to mention the arduous task of wandering around and digging. Moreover, due to the powerful force of gravity, the body of the mountain was also extremely compact and solid. It would take them a great deal of time to carve off a single piece of stone. Perhaps they could indeed flatten this mountain. However, doing so would require 10,000 or even 100,000 years. More importantly, did they have so much time? Here, they would experience hunger, and they would also be restricted by age. At most, they could only live for 1,000 years. That being the case, could they waste so much time here? Then what could they do? If they didn't solve the secret of this valley, they naturally wouldn't be able to find the path to leave. At that time, they would truly die of old age in this place. Ling Han retrieved his divine demon sword and slashed at the mountain face. This was an eventual celestial tool, the sharpest and sturdiest thing in the world. The effects were evident. It wasn't long before he dug a hole that was large enough to fit a person. He entered this hole, and the others hurriedly followed after him. Perhaps this would be their road to survival. In this place, they all became like ordinary mortal beings. They were no longer tireless celestials. After digging for half a day, Ling Han's arms became extremely sore. He passed the divine demon sword to Hu Niu. Hu Niu was only able to dig for 6 hours before handing the sword to the Empress. The Empress was similarly only able to dig for 6 hours before handing the sword to Bewitching Maiden Ru. Bewitching Maiden Ru was far inferior to them, and she was only able to dig for 2 hours. Chapter 2298 Underground River. Chapter 2298 Underground River. They passed the sword around, and dug one after another. Ling Han wasn't afraid that they would steal his divine demon sword. Firstly, he was the most powerful among them. Secondly, the divine demon sword contained his martial intent. One would need to be at least several times more powerful than him if they wanted to erase his martial intent. Otherwise, the divine demon sword would automatically attack them. Everyone heaped praise onto the divine demon sword. Most of them were of the opinion that this sword was forged from precious metals at the 9th lotus. However, they didn't dare to consider the possibility of this sword being an ancestral weapon. A 6th lotus 5 leaves cultivator possessing an ancestral weapon? Was this a joke? Half a month passed, and it was coincidentally Ling Han's turn to do the digging. Crumble. There was a crashing sound as the crushed stone fell away from them instead of toward them. Ling Han faltered for a brief moment before being overcome with delight. This mountain was hollow in the middle, and he had dug into this area. He slashed several more times with the divine demon sword, carving out a hole that was large enough for a single person to pass. He released his divine sense to scout the area first. The entire center of the mountain was empty. It was a gigantic cavern, and if Ling Han stepped in from the entrance that he had created, he would plummet into a bottomless abyss. Even if the bottom weren't filled with blade-like rocks, he would still shatter all of his bones on impact. After all, the pull of gravity here was far too strong. It was like a blade that rested above everyone's head. Ling Han explained the situation to everyone. Upon hearing this, they all became solemn. Ling Han drew Hu Niu, the Empress, and Bewitching Maiden Ru into the Black Tower before entering the cavern and climbing down the cliff. In fact, the others wanted to enter Ling Han's spatial god tool as well. However, they were too embarrassed to ask, so they could only descend the cliff by themselves. Moreover, they wouldn't dare to enter the spatial god tool of other people anyway. This was because they wouldn't understand the situation outside at all. What if they suddenly wanted to come out to take a look, but they still hadn't arrived on solid ground yet? Wouldn't they fall to death? The trust between them hadn't reached such a high level yet. Ling Han descended for a long time. In terms of distance, he had already made it dozens of kilometers below ground. However, the gravity here was far too strong. As a result, the speed of his descent was also extremely low. Otherwise, could he not cover a distance of dozens of kilometers in the blink of an eye? This place was pitch black, and he couldn't see anything more than 1 meter away from him. Meanwhile, his divine sense was also affected by the strong gravity, meaning that he couldn't observe things too far into the distance. Things were already difficult for him, so it was naturally even more torturous for the others. Fortunately, they had Ling Han to scout and lead the way. Otherwise, their descent would have been even slower. Perhaps it might have even been a dozen times slower. A feeling of vexation rose in Celestial Maiden Yunha's mind. Why was Ling Han only willing to draw Hu Niu and the others into his spatial god tool? Why didn't he even ask her? The more she thought about this, the more aggrieved she became. In fact, there were already tears brimming in her eyes. Right at this moment, she suddenly heard Ling Han's delighted shout. "We're almost at the bottom." Everyone was invigorated upon hearing this. They all stopped climbing to look down. They had been entirely focused on carefully descending just then, so how could they have had any spare effort to glance down? Thus, only at this moment did they discover the faint light below them. "We're finally at the bottom." They all breathed a sigh of relief. After descending for a moment, however, Ling Han suddenly furrowed his brows. This was because he could see the bottom clearly now. It was surprisingly an underground river. The speckles of light from just then had come from some unknown matter in this river. The river flowed silently. In fact, this was a harrowing silence. Ling Han explained the situation to the others before coming to a stop. He was still around 2 meters from the surface of the river. They all descended to the same height as Ling Han to stand beside him. However, not a single one of them entered the river. Who knew what the hell the river was filled with? What if it were a potent poison? Ling Han ignored the others as he retrieved some stone and metal from the Black Tower. He tossed them into the river one after another, observing to see if there were any unexpected reactions. Splash! Small ripples appeared in the river as the items splashed down and sank. As they were washed away, nothing strange occurred. Ling Han pondered for a moment before retrieving a small tree to toss into the river. The Black Tower was massive, so he could place all kinds of things inside. The small tree was much more buoyant than the other items, so it didn't sink to the bottom. Instead, it floated on the surface of the river as it flowed away. Everyone was delighted upon seeing this. "We can travel by boat." Even though the Black Tower was massive, it didn't contain everything. At the very least, there was no ready-made boat. Moreover, they were hanging on the face of a cliff right now, and they were also fighting against the strong pull of gravity. Thus, it would be inconceivably difficult to construct a ship. Ling Han simply chose a large tree. He then said, "When I say jump, everyone jump onto the tree." Everyone nodded in understanding. They knew that Ling Han was definitely going to toss a large tree into the river. Peng! Ling Han waved his hand, and a large tree instantly appeared in the river. The tree was massive, and it could easily be used as a boat. "Jump!" Ling Han shouted. He immediately jumped down. The others hurriedly jumped after him. They all landed on the tree. Strangely enough, however, they couldn't feel the strong pull of gravity anymore after sitting on the tree. After arriving here, it was as if the regulations of heaven and earth had undergone some tremendous change. "Will there be a path to leave this place at the end of this underground river?" someone asked. He was truly terrified of this place. He would rather give up on the secret of the armor than stay here any longer. Or perhaps it leads to the center of this land, where all the secrets are contained. However, Ling Han knew that this was the resting place of an 18th Lotus ancestral king. Perhaps they would witness the corpse of this ancestral king at the end of this underground river. He was eager with anticipation. This was because he had received some inspiration from the Rain Emperor. If he absorbed the bones of a 9th Heaven celestial king, He could potentially rely on this to create a ninth divided soul. The Empress and Hunyo both possessed the talent to become monarch stars. However, because source powers and celestial king bones were extremely rare, they could only settle for ascending after cultivating 4 divided souls. However, if he obtained the ancestral king bones here, it would no longer be a distant dream for them to become monarch stars. At that time, Ling Han would suppress the ancestral king bones even if it meant expending the last wisp of power of the Black Tower. He let Hunyo and the others exit the Black Tower. They were temporarily safe. The boat remained stable as it flowed down the river. However, their good fortune didn't last for long. After traveling for 2 hours, the currents suddenly became rapid. The large tree shuddered violently, and this caused everyone to tense up. This boat wasn't going to capsize, was it? Ling Han was just about to draw Hunyo and the others back into the Black Tower. However, the tip of the large tree suddenly sank before floating back up again. A large wave immediately slapped over. Whoosh! The sound of water rushed over. No one knew what the river water was made of, so they naturally tried to dodge. However, they were terrified to discover that they couldn't move. No, it wasn't that they weren't moving. Instead, their speed had become unbelievably slow. They could only stare in shock as the wave crashed over. Ling Han came to a sudden realization. It wasn't that they had become extremely slow. Instead, the flow of time had been affected by something. The flow of time here had become several times slower than in the outside world. It was because of this that they couldn't move as they desired. Hang on. If the flow of time had slowed down for him, why could he detect it? Logically speaking, if the flow of time was different for him and the outside world, the wave should have struck him before he could even come to his senses. How could he have discovered this? There was only a single explanation for this. The flow of time had affected his physical body, but not his divine sense. Slap! The wave crashed over, drenching everyone on the boat. However, it didn't affect them at all. Chapter 2299, Soaring Cultivation. Chapter 2299, Soaring Cultivation. Ling Han turned to Hunyo and the others, and said, "The flow of time here is extremely strange. It seems as if one's divine sense can function countless times faster than normal. We can take advantage of this to cultivate." He had used his divine sense to deliver this message. Otherwise, if he had opened his mouth to speak, it would have taken heaven knew how long to deliver this message. Perhaps it would have taken 1 year, or perhaps it would have taken 10 years. A time flow altered by an 18th Lotus Elite was definitely formidable. The Empress and the others didn't even try to nod. They were all smart people, so they immediately understood Ling Han's advice. To others, this kind of accelerated time flow was of no use. After all, only the time flow for their divine sense was accelerated, while the time flow for their physical body was slowed down. This was much like cultivating under the reincarnation tree. However, it was a different story for Ling Han and company. This was because in reality, they had already reached the immortal palace tier. As such, their physical bodies had already satisfied the cultivation conditions. Right now, they were simply recultivating using the regulations of the foreign realm. It could be said that they simply needed to cultivate their divine senses. Thus, sitting on the tree for a day could perhaps allow their divine senses to undergo dozens of years of cultivation. Their cultivation could soar in leaps and bounds. The 4 of them immediately shut their eyes, entering a state of cultivation. Not long ago, they had been in frequent contact with the Origin Magic Cube, which allowed them to gain a great deal of comprehensions. However, they hadn't yet sorted through these comprehensions in a systematic manner, mainly because they hadn't had enough time. Now, however, a door had been opened for them. They had more than enough time to digest these comprehensions. In any case, if they didn't cultivate now, what else could they do? The difference in flow of time between their divine senses and their bodies existed, so they couldn't control their bodies at all. Ling Han didn't give this advice to Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others. They didn't belong to the same side, so he was already showing great mercy by not killing them. However, these people were either Emperor tiers or Monarch tiers, so it wasn't long before they made sense of the situation as well. Their panic subsided, and they also started to cultivate. The large tree continued to flow down the river. Several days passed, and the currents finally became gentle again. Everyone's body shuddered, and they immediately discovered that they had become countless times faster than before. The flow of time acting on their physical bodies had returned to normal. Crack! Dark clouds gathered overhead, bringing with it heavenly tribulation. Moreover, there wasn't only a single heavenly tribulation. Instead, there were 4. They targeted Ling Han, the Empress, Hunyeo, and bewitching Maiden Ru. Their divine senses had cultivated for heaven knew how long, surpassing the barrier to the dividing soul tier. Once their divine senses returned to their bodies, this immediately caused them to break through. As a result, they naturally attracted heavenly tribulation. This was the end of the underground river, with an expanse of flat land appearing before them. This ground was made up of bare rock, and there wasn't a single blade of grass. Ling Han and his 3 wives hurriedly jumped onto the dry land. They then stood apart as they awaited the arrival of heavenly tribulation. Otherwise, it was possible that they would affect each other's heavenly tribulation if they stood too close to each other. That would definitely be no fun. Rumble. Thunder roared and lightning struck. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others were as envious as could be. They could definitely advance to the dividing soul tier. After all, monarch tiers could at least become 13th Lotus or 14th Lotus ancestral kings. However, advancing a major tier after a short boat trip, this was truly something to be jealous of. However, didn't one need to go to a designated location to break through to the 7th Lotus? How were those 4 naturally advancing to this level? Perhaps they had severed their cultivation to recultivate? There was no other explanation. Even though this guess wasn't entirely correct, this was essentially the situation. It was just that Ling Han and the others hadn't severed their cultivation. Instead, they had only dispersed the power of heaven and earth that belonged to the celestial realm in order to conceal themselves. A day passed, and the tribulation clouds finally dispersed. However, before the others could even speak, heavenly tribulation befell again. There were 4 again, 1 for each person. Their comprehension of the regulations of the foreign realm far exceeded the first leaf of the 7th Lotus. Thus, their cultivation was rapidly rising level after level. Right now, they were facing a tribulation for the 2nd leaf of the 7th Lotus. 1 day passed, and the tribulation clouds dispersed again. The others were just about to speak, yet they were cut off by a loud rumble again. This was the 3rd heavenly tribulation. Fuck. Again. They were all rendered speechless. They were now convinced that these 4 people had definitely severed their cultivation to recultivate. Otherwise, how could such freaks exist in this world? Moreover, it was 4 of them in the same place. 1 day passed, and the 3rd wave of tribulation clouds dispersed. This time, bewitching Maiden Ru finally walked toward the others. The strength of her divine sense once again matched her cultivation. Thus, she naturally wouldn't face another heavenly tribulation. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. It had finally come to an end. They had truly been shocked to death. However, thunder rolled over again. There was actually a 4th wave. This time, the 3 heavenly tribulations targeted Ling Han, the Empress, and Hunyeo. When this wave of heavenly tribulation concluded, there was finally no further gathering of dark clouds. The Empress and Hunyeo naturally reached the 4th leaf of the 7th Lotus. Meanwhile, Ling Han reached the 9th leaf of the 7th Lotus. However, the last 5 leaves were gathered together, so others wouldn't be able to notice them at all. You guys are far too terrifying. Celestial Maiden Yunhe stammered. Even if they were recultivating after severing their cultivation, this was still far too incredible. Ling Han smiled faintly. Right now, his cultivation had already returned to the 9th divided soul. When in the celestial realm, he had already possessed a battle prowess that could rival those at the 2nd secret of the immortal palace tier. Now that he had used the regulations of the foreign realm to perfect his cultivation, his battle prowess naturally rose by another level. He could now challenge those at the third secret of the Immortal Palace tier. This was deeply astonishing. Ling Han shook himself slightly, causing his suit of armor to clatter to the ground. His cultivation level was far superior to before, so these pieces of armor were completely useless to him now. Let's continue forward, he said. He was extremely interested in the ancestral king bones. He definitely had to obtain them for Hu Niu and the Empress. As for bewitching Maiden Ru, he could forget about that. Initially, she had only possessed the talent to become a king tier. Thanks to the heavenly Dao Jade, she had managed to become an emperor tier. Then, thanks to the 100 Fruits tree, she had been lucky enough to become a monarch tier. However, this had already consumed all of her potential. It was impossible for her to become a monarch star. After all, there were only 100 or so monarch stars even in the foreign realm. Everyone followed after Ling Han. Meanwhile, Ling Han retrieved his divine demon sword. Since he was at the 9th leaf of the 7th lotus, he naturally needed to raise the level of the divine demon sword. The ground was extremely uneven, rising and falling all over the place. The atmosphere was also extremely dark and gloomy, and it was also harrowingly quiet. The sound of their footsteps was extremely crisp and clear. Tap, tap, tap. Their footsteps reverberated throughout the surroundings, with some sounding close and some sounding distant. However, these sounds were mixed together and hard to discern, so it was as if dozens or even hundreds of people were walking together. Something's not right, Hu Niu suddenly exclaimed. She stopped in her tracks and used her dainty nose to sniff the surroundings. She also bared her 2 canines. Ling Han and the others also stopped. Tap, tap, tap. The echoes continued. However, since they had already stopped, these echoes also gradually died down. However, a single set of footsteps continued to persistently echo. Everyone was astonished. They had already stopped, so whom did these footsteps belong to? They carefully analyzed this sound. In the end, they turned their gazes toward the darkness to their left. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps drew closer and closer. This also caused them to grow increasingly tense and anxious. These footsteps were slow, but they were also extremely steady. After an entire 30 minutes, they finally saw a streak of light appearing. Ant. Everyone was astonished by what they saw. This was a glowing metallic person only 1 meter tall. It only possessed a simple humanoid shape, and it didn't have any hands or feet. So adorable. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and bewitching Maiden Ru exclaimed. Chapter 2300 War Soldier. Chapter 2300 War Soldier. Hu Niu stuck her tongue out and said, disgusting. She was a standard glutton, so in her eyes, there was no such thing as adorable or not adorable. There only existed delicious or disgusting. Meanwhile, the Empress didn't pay any heed to this. She was no glutton, and she was as proud as could be. She believed that she was the greatest and most beautiful in the entire world. No one could rival her. The metallic person slowly walked over in a mechanical manner. It swayed from left to right, and sure enough, it appeared fairly adorable. Here, give me a hug, bewitching Maiden Ru said as she immediately jumped forward. She extended her arms toward the metallic person. Whir! The metallic person raised its head to look at bewitching Maiden Ru. At the same time, 2 rays of red light shot from its eyes, racing toward bewitching Maiden Ru. Bewitching Maiden Ru gave a soft shout as she immediately crossed her arms before her chest, drawing on the regulations and forming a shield. Pang! The 2 rays of red light struck the shield, causing intense light to erupt into the surroundings. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ru was forcefully pushed back. Thud, thud, thud. She retreated a dozen or so steps before finally coming to a stop. The metallic person didn't stop, and with a jump, it continued to attack bewitching Maiden Ru. Are you picking on me? Bewitching Maiden Ru shouted in anger. This machine looked so adorable, yet it actually dared to attack her. She no longer found it adorable. She resolutely attacked, unleashing her Earth Soul cultivation. However, Her battle prowess was at the peak stage of the fifth soul, and this was enough to crush almost everyone at the dividing soul tier. Crackle. The eyes of the metallic person lit up. This was its attacking method, and it was capable of attacking from range. Moreover, its attacks were relatively powerful, and it was able to force bewitching Maiden Rue back. Everyone was astounded. What in the world was this metallic person? If it had been at the 8th lotus, then suppressing bewitching Maiden Rue shouldn't have been a problem. If it were at the 7th lotus, however, just what kind of incredible craftsmanship would be required to allow it to possess this limit-breaking battle prowess? This was definitely a puppet. Celestial Maiden Yunha's expression changed, and she exclaimed, "This is a war soldier from the Dark Inverse realm." That's right, it's definitely a war soldier. After hearing her reminder, everyone nodded in agreement. They all wore expressions of realization. Ling Han's interest was piqued. How did the Dark Inverse realm possess so many strange and peculiar things? This dimension was seemingly very reliant on external items. For example, their armor could greatly increase the battle prowess of cultivators. Moreover, he had only obtained the crudest of such armor. It hadn't been forged with care, and could easily become pieces of precious armor after being placed here for 3 years. That being the case, just how formidable would the exquisitely created pieces of armor be? Now, another strange war soldier had appeared before them. It was most likely at the dividing soul tier, yet its battle prowess could surpass the heaven soul. It was truly astonishing. One had to realize that only heaven soul emperor tiers could rival bewitching Maiden Rue. The battle was intense, and bewitching Maiden Rue was completely unable to gain an advantage. Her strong suit was charm techniques, yet her opponent was a battle robot with no sentience. It could be said that her beauty was being shown to a blind being. It was completely useless. Thus, she could only rely on her physical skills to battle against this robot. However, this wasn't her strong suit, so she was completely unable to suppress the war soldier. Ling Han became increasingly interested in the creations of the Dark Inverse realm. If he could steal this knowledge and bring it back to the celestial realm, he could greatly increase the strength of the celestial realm. At that time, resisting the invasion of the foreign realm would be far easier than it was now. He stepped forward and grabbed at the war soldier. Upon seeing this, bewitching Maiden Rue cooperatively jumped back. She didn't try to stubbornly prove her strength. Before Ling Han, she knew when to advance and when to retreat. She definitely wouldn't steal Ling Han's thunder on purpose, nor would she lose face for him. Peng! With a single push of his palm, Ling Han immediately pinned the war soldier to the ground. It was completely unable to move. He possessed battle prowess matching the third secret of the Immortal Palace tier. Everyone had already become accustomed to this. They knew that Ling Han's power was already at an indescribable level. Ling Han subconsciously used his divine sense to observe the war soldier. However, the war soldier immediately shattered with a crack. This was just like the precious armor from before. Ling Han picked up a piece of the broken war soldier and carefully examined it. It was filled with thin metallic threads that were woven in a tremendously complex pattern. It had self-destructed again. The Dark Inverse realm had seemingly integrated special structures into all of their creations. It didn't matter if these creations fell into the hands of their enemies. If the latter were too weak, they would be unable to observe these creations with their divine sense. If they were too strong, however, their divine sense would also cause these creations to immediately self-destruct. This prevented their enemies from discovering any secrets. This made things extremely difficult. If these creations couldn't be examined, how could Ling Han replicate them and bring the technology back to the celestial realm? Ling Han shook his head and casually tossed the piece of metal aside. The others didn't pick it up, either. This was a crippled war soldier, and they existed all throughout the two-realm battlefield. In fact, there were many that were countless times more powerful than this one. However, even though the ancestral kings had examined them for innumerable epochs, they had still come up empty-handed. They couldn't find anything of worth. Let's go. They continued to advance. Right now, their goal had already moved on from trying to discover the secrets of the war soldier. Instead, They were trying to figure out how to leave this place. Otherwise, they would all die of old age in a measly 1,000 years. They continued to venture forward. This time, they kept their ears perked for any changes in the sound of their footsteps lest they were subject to another surprise attack. The battle prowess of these war soldiers was astounding. Moreover, who was to say there wasn't a more powerful one lying in wait? After walking for an hour, they all came to a stop. This was because they heard an extra pair of footsteps. Tap, tap, tap. These footsteps were rapidly closing in. It was far quicker than the previous war soldier. Was this a completely different war soldier? They looked behind them. However, this place was far too dark, so their vision was severely impeded. They could only see a meter around them. After a short while, a figure appeared before them. Fuck. Why is it a person? This wasn't a war soldier, but rather a member of the demon race. He had a single horn on his head, and he was none other than the elite from the Baoyu clan. He was slightly disheveled, and his body was riddled with wounds. He wore a cruel and vicious expression on his face. Even though he had unleashed his trump card and fought with his life against the holy deer, he had still been no match for it. His companions had all been eaten alive, and only he had been fortunate enough to escape. Moreover, this was only because he had reached the holy mountain. Otherwise, he would have definitely been killed. He placed all of his resentment on Ling Han and the others. Moreover, he also knew about the valley, so he gave chase all the way over. Even though he didn't catch up to Ling Han and the others, he discovered the hole that they had dug. Thus, he continued to pursue them. At this moment, he finally caught up. "Kneel," he bellowed in an icy voice. All of his companions had been killed, filling him with both grief and fury. However, he didn't dare to seek revenge on the holy deer. Thus, he could only take his anger out on Ling Han and the others. "Single-homed beast, not only are you ugly, but even your mouth is stinky," Ling Han said with disdain. Celestial Maiden Yunhe and the others all found this funny. This was because Ling Han also had 2 horns, yet he was calling the other person a single-horned beast. Then what was he? A 2-horned beast. Did he not see the irony in this? Impertinence, the single-horned demon roared with a humph. His right hand swiped at Hu Niu and the others. He knew that Ling Han was extremely strange. Even though his battle prowess was inferior, his physique was sturdy enough to withstand his attacks. Thus, he decided to capture Hu Niu and the others first. What audacity! Ling Han's gaze became ice-cold. Swoosh! The divine demon sword was unsheathed, and a flash of blue soared through the air, sending an arm tumbling into the sky. The arm then thumped into the ground. This arm belonged to the single-horned demon. This person was called Baoyu Jianying, and he was transfixed with shock and disbelief as he stared at his severed arm. He then looked at the sword in Ling Han's hand with an incredulous expression. Fuck. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,